Morning, team. So, welcome to this Wednesday webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about listed buildings. So, first of all, as always, if you can just give me a quick mic check to make sure that you can hear me properly. So, in either the chat box or the Q&A box, which you should have access to through your menu, if you can just go in there and just give me a thumbs up, give me a yes or something positive to let me know that you can hear what I'm saying, that would be much appreciated. I'll just wait a couple of seconds before that comes through. Thank you very much. Good morning, Patrick. How are you? Good morning, Enrico. Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it. Right, okay, let's get cracking. So this is an introduction to listed buildings. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of depth that we can go into, but I think fundamentally there's quite a misunderstanding about what a listed building means. What the process is. In fact, let's just get into the next slide because we're going to talk about the agenda. So here we go. We're going to talk about what a listed building is. Then we're going to talk about how does the listing affect what you can do, who's involved, and how does it increase your paperwork? Because believe me, it will increase your paperwork. And then also, how do you remove a building? So if you've taken on a building that has a listing, is there a way that you can get that removed and therefore reduce the amount of paperwork that you need to complete to do what you want to do with that building? Hope that all makes sense. What we'll do is just feel free to ask questions throughout. So you've got access to the Q&A section of the menu. So if you've got any questions throughout, feel free to go into that Q&A section, type your question out, and then we'll deal with it. Honestly, because this is an introduction, we're probably going to be here for about 10 or 15 minutes or so. And I'm happy, as always, to answer any questions at the end. So what is a listed building? It's fairly vague, really, in terms of the actual definition of what a listed building is. It's basically something that is significant in terms of the historic makeup of buildings in that particular area. So in the UK, it's anything that is significant in terms of architecture, in terms of style, in terms of design, in terms of materials used. It's very vague. It's not, there's no black and white answer to this. It's just that the key word that needs to be remembered is significant. So let's read it out. Listing marks and celebrates a building's special architectural and historic interest, and also brings it under the consideration of the planning system. And that's the key thing. And that's the thing that's going to affect you guys the most. So somebody says that building is significant and they give it a listing and they decide what listing that they give it, which we're going to get into in just a second. And then that listing determines what you can and can't do with it. And it makes sure that somebody else has got their eye on your deal, eye on your project, to make sure that whatever it is that is significant about that building is maintained. So you need to make sure in your plans, because they're going to be looking at your plans, you need to make sure that you mitigate for any risks that are involved in losing that building's significance. I hope that makes sense. So the types of listings that you can get, you've probably heard of at least two of these. So you can get grade 1, grade 2 star, and grade 2. Now, in terms of this next bit genuinely shocked me. In terms of what percentage of buildings are grade 1, grade 2 star, or grade 2, these are how the stats break down. So only 2.5% of all listed buildings are grade 1. And grade 1 is the highest level of concern because these buildings are seen as exceptional. So you're talking about, big important buildings to the entire country, like, for example, Buckingham Palace, like St. Paul's Cathedral. They have they are in the top 2.5% of significantly important buildings to the UK. They are seen as exceptional and they are given the highest level of protection in terms of the grade 1 listing. Now, I've been doing quite a lot of research on this, obviously, in order to make sure that my information is correct. And I couldn't find a good description of what is the difference between grade 2 star and grade 2, other than it's slightly better than just grade 2. That is literally it. But and this is the other bit that I don't really understand, but only 5.8% of buildings are seen as grade 2 star. So they are seen as nationally important buildings. but then the description for grade 2 was exactly the same. So the rest of buildings fit into grade 2, which is 91.7%. And again, it's a nationally important building. So grade 2 listing and a grade 1 listing. So let's have a look at how that affects what you can do with them. So any listing will mean that the council is brought to attention on this building. So the guys who put the listings in place, they say, well, this one is a grade 1 listed building, or that one is a grade 2 listed building. And then the council are aware that if anything happens to that building, then they need to take the listing into consideration. So what most councils will do in that case, because just having the listing on a building doesn't mean that you can't use permitted development rights, for example. However, what the council in most cases will do then is put some other kind of restriction in place to stop you just being able to use permitted development rights without the council having some kind of say in it within the planning system. So what councils will do is they might put an Article 4 restriction on it, for example, as well. So this building is brought to the council's attention, especially the planning department. The planning department know that this building is significantly important because it has the listing. Now, if they do put Article 4 in place, or whatever they decide to do, they need to take into consideration any new work or material changes that you make to that building are taken into consideration for the building's significance. So if they put Article 4 in place, obviously, you won't be able to use permitted development rights, or the ones that are that they specifically remove within that Article 4 listing. They could also put a conservation area in that area, and essentially a conservation area also removes your permitted development rights. So that conservation area they might put in there because there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 buildings that are architecturally significant. But the other team of people that are now alerted to what you're doing with that building are the guys that manage the listed building consent. So if you see a building and you want to, let's say you're going to try and use permitted development rights. Okay, so there is a building that is grade 2 listed, and that grade 2 listed building it's got the grade 2 listing, but the council haven't done anything with it. Right, so the council haven't put an Article 4 restriction in place, or the council haven't put a conservation area in place. The plans that you submit for that building, whether it be a prior approval or a full planning application, also need to go through to listed building consent. And listed building consent have just as much control over that building to say whether you can or can't do what you want to do, because they are all about the maintaining the significance of that building. So now there's a whole different team that need to look and approve whatever you're suggesting that you're going to do to that building. So even if the council are totally lax, they don't do anything to put any further restrictions on that building, and the listed building consent team are still there, and they need to approve what you're saying that you're going to do as well. I hope that makes sense. Now, in terms of adding to your paperwork, well, this is, if anybody's been through planning before, you know how much of a headache that can be, and how much planning and preparation that you need to do. And then if you're discharging reserve matters or something like that, again, it's more paperwork. Now you've got the listed building consent team as well, and they need to be aware, and they need to be involved in everything that you're doing with that building, right down to the nitty-gritty detail of choosing materials to use on that building. They need to be aware of it. So in terms of the increased paperwork, yeah, it's going to double your paperwork easily. And that is, you need to take that into consideration when you're putting your plan together for how long it's going to take for you to get to the point where you can actually build your building, right? So you need to take that into consideration. So they're like it says on the slide, they're going to want to look at anything that affects the special features of the building. However, you do have some information to go on for this. So you can check on the register of listed buildings, and if you find the building that you're interested in purchasing, it will specifically say why that building has been listed. So, for example, when you're putting your plans together, if the front facade of that building is of significant importance, because it reflects a specific architectural style, for example. If that's the case, then you know that that's the bit that you need to be careful of and you need to maintain and you need to ensure is there. But the rest of the building might not have any significance. And if the rest of the building doesn't have any significance, then you've got much more of a free role to do what you want to with the rest of that building. And the listed building consent team and the planning department are not going to be that interested in what you do with that, because that's not the significant part of that building. So you look at the listing, find out the information, find out why that property is listed, and your architect will be able to work with that in order to put a plan together to use that that listing part of the building. Because let's face it, that a listed building is going to sell for slightly more money, right? Because it's significantly important. It has kudos. It has importance to the country. It's probably, I'm not going to say this for every single listed building, but it's probably a very beautiful building, which is one of the reasons that it would have been listed in the first place. So in terms of your GDV and the comparables to local buildings around that area that are not listed, you're probably going to have a higher GDV because you've got a listed building. So it might be worth you working on this and trying to find ways to overcome the hurdles, the bureaucracy, and the barriers that you have in order to hit that higher GDV. I do have a friend actually who bought 2 listed buildings in Chester, and he converted them into townhouses. I think they were sort of mills, 3-story mills. He converted the 2 of them into townhouses, and that project took him more than double the amount of time that he was expecting because of not only because of the bureaucracy at the front end, but also because the planning department and the listed building consent team, they want to come in and they want to make sure that you're doing everything right as per they have asked you to do. So they're going to be in and they're going to be involved. Now, in his case, I don't think he followed their plans quite as tightly as they wanted him to. And that's why the build process of his case was elongated as well. If he had done exactly what they wanted, might have cost him a bit more money up front. However, he would have got to the point of getting the buildings completed on time, and he would have found it much easier. So this is not just from their point of view, from the planning department, from the listed building consent team. This is not just a bureaucratic exercise that they're not just box tickers. These guys tend to be very passionate about this kind of thing, and they will want to be involved as much as possible. So you need to mitigate for that during your planning process. So finally, going on to how to remove a property from the listing. So that power is held by the Secretary of State. So you have to make a request to the Secretary of State to remove your building from the listing. It's not something that's discussed very frequently because hardly any buildings come off the listed building, the building list. So it's not something that happens very often. So if you're thinking that you're going to get a building, but actually it's not as significant as the listing suggests, and you're just going to remove it from there, that's quite a battle that you're going to be facing there. And I wouldn't recommend that anybody uses that as a strategy to purchase buildings. What you can do is you can get something called a certificate of immunity. And a certificate of immunity means that you can purchase a building and you can get this certificate. And that certificate says that the building that you have purchased will not be listed for the next 5 years. So looking at this from another way, if you're buying a building and you think, actually, this is quite a significant building, I'm not sure why it hasn't been listed. What you can do is you can, during the purchase process, you can get a certificate of immunity, and that certificate of immunity gives you 5 years where you know that that building isn't going to be listed. Now, what you can then do is you can use permitted development rights. You can use, the planning shortcuts that are available on any building to do what you want to do to that building. Obviously, from your point of view, if that's your strategy, you still need to maintain the stuff that's significantly interesting about that building, because then you want it to be listed once you've done your stuff to achieve a higher GDV, to achieve that eliteness that a listing gives a building. So you achieve that higher GDV, and then you can sell it on for even more than the GDV once you've completed your works. So that's the end of the introduction into listed buildings. How it affects you, what bureaucracy it's going to add to your workload, and what the listing means.